Alrighty, so my name is Maureen Haney, and I am a program manager for the Tutor.com government and federal programs. It should come as no surprise to anyone that math is one of our most tutored subjects, which is why we are doing this series of webinars. A lot of parents of the younger students these days are telling us that they're stressed out because they can't help their kids with the new math. Many of you may have access to the Tutor.com program, which is excellent. But Tutor.com is not going to be the focus of our webinar today, and this webinar has been opened up to anyone and everyone looking for some advice on that math. And of course, we have so many experts behind the scenes, just like our presenter today, who has years of experience working with tutors, and we call her our math whiz. She loves math, and it is her goal to make you love math too. So on that note, I would like to introduce the lovely Winona Young, who is a mentor manager on our Tutor.com instructional team.
Thank you so much, Maureen, and hello to all of our participants and attendees. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just a little bit about myself before we get started. Although this webinar is catered to elementary age children and the parents of those children, I have a middle schooler and a high schooler, and I know that Common Core mathematics is an area where topics tend to progress up the chain. So as Maureen said earlier, I am a mentor manager for Tutor.com. Well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, my role is really to support mentors and tutors as they help create sound educational experiences for students across the country. I also work to create resources for students and tutors and supporting our client services and other programs and endeavors such as this one to bring educational information and opportunities to students and parents. A little bit about myself. I am a wife to a disabled Navy vet. He served in both Desert Storm and Desert Shield. And as I mentioned earlier, I do have 2 teenagers and a boxer and as well as 2 guinea pigs. So pretty busy around my house these days. My background for the most part is in public education. I spent 15 years teaching high school, another 2 years or so coaching teachers outside of the classroom. I've also worked as an adjunct professor and traveled across the country presenting to teachers and students alike. I've co-authored an advanced math course here in the state of Georgia where I live, and served as grader of AP exams for the College Board. So as you might be able to tell, I'm a little bit of a math geek. Actually, I'm a big math geek. And I'm also a huge fan and proponent of Common Core. I think I just heard a few groans, but you must be at least a little bit interested because you're tuning in to hear what I have to say. So let's get started. Here's what I want to be able to accomplish today. I want to help you understand the conceptual foundations for addition and subtraction. I want to also help you understand how manipulatives are used to help students visualize addition and subtraction. We're going to add and subtract whole numbers using decomposition as well as composition. And we're going to add and subtract whole numbers using something called compensation. Now, if those terms sound foreign to you, no worries, we'll simplify as we go along. So let's talk manipulatives. In the mathematics classroom, it is important to appeal to all learning styles, whether that's verbal through speaking and writing, visual, oral through hearing, or physical, what we know maybe as tactile or kinesthetic, hands-on. Manipulatives allow students to visualize and physically interact with the mathematics that they're learning in the classroom. One of those manipulatives is called a 10 frame. And all it is just a 2x5 rectangular frame. Counters are used and placed in these frames to illustrate numbers that are less than or equal to 10. This assists younger students with developing number sense as it relates to quantities that add up to 10. This manipulative is versatile. It can be drawn by hand or created using simple software like a table in Word or Excel. So let's take a look at a few examples of how a 10 frame is used. In this example, we see 5 counters. Students may see these in clusters of 2 and 3. Whether they look from left to right, that's 3 on the left and 2 on the right, or top to bottom, 2 on the top and 3 on the bottom. Here's another example that also shows 5 counters. As students are visualizing the number 5, they may see this in a variety of ways. One cluster could be 3 and 2, 3 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Another cluster could be 4 and 1, 4 situated to the left and 1 to the right. Or 2, 2 and 1. There are 2 counters in the first column, 2 counters in the second, and 1 in the third. Looking at all 3 representations at the same time, here's some observations that may be made. We have all 3 representing the number 5. There are different arrangements of counters that are acceptable to represent the number 5. In each 10 frame, we have 5 boxes that are full and 5 boxes that are empty. In the third 10 frame, we have 5 counters across the top. This easily helps students understand the idea of half. The 10 frame is half full. So even before they've begun to discuss fractions, then we see the idea that 5 are full and I need another 5 to create a full 10 frame. So the idea that 5 is less than 10 because of missing spaces is also an observation that can be made. And specifically, students can begin to see that 5 is 5 less than 10, or in other words, 10 minus 5 is 5. So really quick, we're going to take some pauses throughout the webinar just to give you a chance to engage and test your thinking as we go through different topics. So as you look at this specific 10 frame, we have a frame with 8 counters. What are some observations do you think your child would make when they initially look at this? Or what is an observation that you would make when you initially look at it? Take a few seconds, just organize 1 or 2 thoughts and type those in the chat box.
And Winona, I just want to hop in here and say if you want to type it in the questions box, that's also fine, because I know on a mobile device you may not be able to see the chat box. So either one of those. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. I do see 1 response. A few more seconds to type those in. Okay, great. So here are some observations that you may have made. 1, we see the number 8. We see that with 8 counters. We see that 8 boxes are full. Someone else may say that 2 of them are empty. And this leads again to this idea of number sense as it relates to 10, that because the frame is not full, 8 is actually less than 10, and specifically 8 is 2 less than 10. So good job there. So let's talk about how we use these 10 frames. In addition, one of the second grade standards is to add within 20 by regrouping, which is really what we mean when we say carrying. We're regrouping numbers according to place value. It may not have ever been explained that way, unfortunately for us, but we do this by making tens. Up to this point, students have learned that there are different ways to make 10. They can add 1 plus 9, 2 plus 8, 3 plus 7, and so on. The 10 frames serve as a great visual for how we regroup. So let's consider the example of adding 9 plus 6. Adding on from 10 can make adding a bit easier for students. So first, what we want students to think about is how many more are needed in order to make 10. So from 9, I need 1 more to make 10. That's because 9 plus 1 is 10. I also know that 6 is the same as 1 plus 5. So I can, here's a word for you, decompose or break apart 6 into 1 and 5. Now I can literally see that 9 plus 6 is the same as 10 plus 5, which is 15. So what do we do here? We actually carried a counter over from the right frame to the left one. In fact, we made a 10 to do that. Great job. Let's try adding 4 plus 7. Because second graders have studied something called the commutative property, Don't make it a big deal. Just think of it as something that most of us do each day. We commute back and forth to work. They understand that the idea of adding 4 plus 7 gives us the same result as adding 7 plus 4. So when we set up our 10 frames, we can set them up as adding 7 plus 4. So we have 7 blue counters in the left 10 frame, 4 red counters in the right 10 frame. So again, we want this idea of making 10, which visually means let's fill up a 10 frame. So when we look at the 10 frame on the left, we have 7 counters. We can see that there are 3 missing spaces. So I need 3 counters in order to make a 10 in the left. And because I can decompose or break down 4 into 3 and 1, sorry, let me let those move first. Because I can break down 4 into 3 and 1, that lets me know that 7 plus 4 is the same as 10 plus 1. And in the 10 frame, I can see a full 10 and 1 counter. So that is the same as 11. Okay, your turn again. Here are triple 10 frames. Don't be disturbed. It's okay. The question is really how many counters do we need to move in order to add 12 plus 6? And I'll tell you that there are multiple correct answers here. So if we are trying to make 10s, we're trying to add 12 plus 6. How many counters would we need to move? Feel free to add your responses to either the chat box or the questions box. Okay, I see a couple of responses here. You guys are really thinking it through. Okay, let's take a look. We could move 6. So I saw a response for 6. If we move the 6 red ones to the lower 10 frame on the left, then we have a full frame of 10. And then in the bottom, we have a frame that has 8 counters. But there are some other options. We could move 2. We could take the 2 counters from the bottom left frame and move them up to the top right frame. Again, leaving us with a full 10 frame on the left and I'm sorry, I set my timer there, I apologize. It's leaving us with a full 10 frame on the left and a 10 frame on the right that's missing 2 spaces. Again, that gives us 18. Now I did see an option for 4. We might want to think about that a little bit. Moving 4 would give us a complete 10 frame on the right, but it would leave us with 2 incomplete 10 frames on the left. And there's nothing wrong with that. We can still count those up and see that there are 8 counters. But from the perspective of the student, what we try to teach them is to use a process that helps with efficiency. And even though second graders don't know the word efficient, it's something that they learn along the way about timeliness of processes. So we want our children to be efficient problem solvers. And that may sound a little bit of an oxymoron right now, maybe, considering that you might be saying, well, can't they just do the algorithm and be done? That's the most efficient or the quickest way. I know, I truly understand. And believe me, they get there. But 10 frames help lay the foundation for understanding along the way. So now you're ready to subtract with 10 frames? When we think of subtraction, we as parents, adults, likely just think of a minus sign. But intuitively, to subtract just means to take away or to remove. So this is the idea we will use when subtracting with 10 frames. Let's say we wanted to subtract 16 minus 7. We begin with 16 counters located in 2 10 frames side by side, 10 in the left frame and 6 in the right frame. This time, instead of counting up to make 10, we want to count down to make 10. And we can do that by taking 6 away to create a 10 for 16. So we could take away those 6 and we would have a full 10 frame. But I also know this idea of decomposing or breaking down. Not dead bodies, just numbers, okay? So we could break the 7 down to a 6 and a 1. By removing the 6 already that we see on the right, we only have one counter left to remove, and we can remove that from the 10 frame on the left, leaving us with 9 counters in the left frame. A student could look at this and easily identify this as 9 because there's just one open space on the 10 frame. So tell me, are you smarter than a second grader? I think you are. This problem is similar. We have 13 minus 5. So we begin with 13 counters represented across 2 10 frames. We're going to take 3 of those from the right counter to make a single frame. That's our 10 frame. And then because 3 and 2 make 5, we now have 2 counters that need to be removed from the left frame. So in total, we remove 5 counters from 13, leaving us with 8 counters. Note the missing spaces. 2 missing spaces, second graders can rationalize that that means there are 8 full spaces. So 13 minus 5 is 8. You're doing great with this. I know you are. And just to make sure, it's your turn. So when you take a look at subtracting 11 minus 7, make sure you pay attention to this question. It's a little tricky. How many counters should you remove from the 10 frame on the left? Just the one on the left when you're subtracting 11 minus 7. So think about first, we want to make a 10, and then we want to remove the remaining counters. So how many should be removed from that 10 frame on the left-hand side? Oh, I'm seeing some answers coming in. People are excited. Good job. If anybody else wants to jump in, go ahead. About 5 more seconds. Okay, here we go. So in order to make the 10, we need to take 1 away from the right-hand side. That makes our 10 frame full on the left. Then because 7 breaks down into 1 and 6, we're going to need to remove an additional 6 counters from the left 10 frame. So those of you who answered 6, you got it. Great job. That shows us that 11 minus 7 is 4. You're killing it. You're doing a good job. That's slang for good thing. My kids taught me that. Not a bad thing. All right, so that was one manipulative that's used. Eventually, though, students will need to add and subtract with numbers that go beyond 20. So let's look at another type of manipulative that will help with that. These are called base 10 blocks. And these blocks are used to help students explore concepts of addition and subtraction. In general, they're plastic shapes that each represent a different place value. So the unit cube in green represents a 1 unit, as its name suggests. The rods themselves in red represent 10 units or 110. You'll notice that it's comprised of 10 unit cubes that are melded together. Then we have flats. These are the ones in yellow. These are comprised of 100 unit cubes, and they're arranged in a 10 by 10 array. Now we can do a geometry lesson and talk about algebra and area and volume, but we'll save that for another day. Lastly, we have the cubes. These are the ones in blue. They represent 1,000 unit cubes. So literally, if you took 1,000 of those green ones and melded them together, you could create this cube. And it represents a volume of 1,000 cubic centimeters. Again, geometry for another day. In today's webinar, to kind of keep it practical, we will only work with the units, rods, and flats, but all ideas can be extended to the cubes as well. Now, these specific manipulatives are sold by several companies. However, you can make or use what you have at home. Pennies can be units, pencils or crayons can be rods, and index card cutouts can be flats. Or you can just have your child draw squares or circles for the units, lines for the rods, and larger squares for the flats. Pretty versatile, easy to make at home. Base 10 blocks are used to help students represent, add, and subtract numbers. So students understand how to represent numbers based on play value. Let's look at some examples. Take a look at 26. Recall that the digits in a number represent different values. So in the number 26, the first digit represents the tens place, and we can represent that with 2 rods, each rod representing 10. The sixth digit, the digit of 6, represents the ones place, and we can represent that with 6 unit cubes. When students see this picture, they know that this is 2 rods for 20 and 6 unit cubes for 6. But they can express this in words as well, 2 tens and 6 ones, or even with numbers as 20 plus 6. So here we see 3 different representations for the number 26. Let's go bigger. You got this. 314. Again, we're basing this on place value. So the first digit of 3 represents the hundredths place. We're going to use flats for this one. So that's 3 flats. The 1 in the middle represents the tens place. We're going to use 1 rod. And the 4 at the end represents the ones place. We're going to use 4 unit cubes. So in pictures, we have 3 flats, 1 rod, 4 unit cubes. In words, we have 3 hundredths, 1 10, and 4 ones. And numerically, we have 300 plus 10 plus 4. And this idea of multiple representations is present throughout the math standards from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. Okay, your turn. You don't have to draw it. You just have to tell me what you see. So here we have 2 flats, 3 rods, and 6 unit cubes. What number does this represent? Let me see what you got in the chat. Oh, you're already there before I could see it. Good job. Awesome. So this is what second graders are doing. They are using manipulatives, or if they don't have the physical ones, they're using cutouts or forms of manipulatives to help them represent numbers. And so you're correct. This is 2 flats, 3 rods, 6 ones, 200 plus 30 plus 6, or 236. Excellent. Now, how do we use these to add? Let's do a little word problem. And this is not real life in anyone's house, I know. I know because it's not enough time. So on Monday, Winana's son spent 43 minutes playing Minecraft and 25 minutes watching YouTube videos about Minecraft. So the question is, how much time did he spend on Minecraft? Now, your students really are doing word problems as young as kindergarten. They don't wait until 2nd grade because we want them to be able to transfer knowledge to real life situations. Students will recognize this problem as an addition problem because we're combining values. So when adding using place value, we place digits that are in the same place value together. Okay, so let's start with 43. We can break 43 down into its place value components by writing it as 40 plus 3, or thinking of it as 4 tens and 3 ones. 25, we can break down into 20 plus 5, or recognizing it as 2 tens and 5 ones. So when we combine, we're going to combine with the same place value. We're going to add tens with tens. So 4 tens and 2 tens give me 6 tens, and ones with ones. 3 ones and 5 ones give me 8 ones. And so when I combine those, I find that he spent a total of 68 minutes on Minecraft. This is severely underrated. It's way more than that, but I think you get the idea. Here's another way to represent this addition problem. Yes, let's use lines and squares this time, which are our substitutes for rods and units. So we're going to add again by combining tens with ones. So we have 4 tens and 3 ones for 43. That's just 4 lines and 3 little squares. And then we have 2 tens and 5 ones for 25, 2 rods and 5 little squares. And again, what we want to do is add tens with tens and ones with ones. So one way we can do that is just by physically moving lines or rods closer to each other. So I'm going to move the tens to the left, and I'm going to move the ones to the right. Now, physically, a student can look and see that there are 6 tens and 8 ones. And so again, we arrive at the same answer, 68 minutes. Just another method, another way to show it. Let's take a look at what happens when we add 3-digit numbers and regroup, which we know as carrying. But first, a quick review on regrouping. We can can represent the number 10 with 10 unit cubes, or we can group those together and trade them for a single rod. Both are equivalent representations of the number 10. Likewise, we can show 100 as 10 tens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There we go. Or we can trade them in for a flat, both which represent the number 100. This trading or regrouping or compensation, I said that word earlier, allows us to exchange one grouping of values for a single place value, which is useful in regrouping. So let's add 527 plus 246. We'll start by modeling 527. We have 5 hundreds, 2 tens, and 7 ones. Then with 246, we have 2 hundreds, 4 tens, and 6 ones. Notice that we have 13 ones total. We can group 10 of these and carry them over to the tens place as a 1 rod, as a 110 rod. This is called trading or regrouping or compensation, and it makes it easier for younger children to count correctly by place value. Now, with less than 10 in each place value group, we can count out what we have. There are 700s or 700, 7 tens or 70, and 3 ones, just 3. And adding all of those together, we now know that 527 plus 246 is the same as 773. But what happened to carrying? That's the question of the day, right? Well, let's compare what we've just done with the algorithm that we all know and learned in elementary school. So again, we have 527, 500s, 2 tens, 7 ones, place values lined up correctly. We're adding 246, again, lining up those place values correctly, and we can't forget our line. That's really important. Now, if I just added these, go with me on this. If I just added from the ones place, 7 plus 6 gives me 13 ones. But we know that we can group 10 of these and carry them over to the tens place as a 110. So what I can do here, here's 6 and 7 for the tens and hundreds. What I can do here is take this 1 and move it to the tens place. This is what we know is carrying. Think back to the picture. We traded the 10 cubes in for a 1 rod. Then when we're adding for the tens place, this is no longer a 6, but it's now a 7. So 773 is the same answer that we get with 527 plus 246. So the algorithm still exists. Our kids are just learning the conceptual understanding first. So here's a question for you. Again, you don't have to go through the whole thing. The question is just what trade would need to be made in order to add these numbers? And I'm going to give you some options. Do I need to trade 10 ones for 10? We'll do A, B, C, D. A, trade 10 ones for 10. B, trade 10 tens for 100. C, do both of these. Or D, don't do either one of these. So what trades do I need to make? Do I need to trade 10 tens for 100? Sorry, start over. A, 10 ones for a 10. B, 10 tens for 100. C, both. Or D, neither. Thinking it through. One way you can think of it is what do I need to carry? But we're talking trades and compensation. All right, let's take a look. If you answered C, you are absolutely correct. When we add, we notice that we have more than 10 ones and more than 10 tens. So we need to trade a 1, 10 ones for a 10. And we also need to add that 1 to the tens place. We need to trade 1 rod or 10 rods for a flat. So we're carrying the 1 to the hundreds place and making sure that we add that as well. So when we add 784 to 139, we end up with 9 hundreds, 2 tens, and 3 ones for a total of 923. You are killing it. Genius. Good job here. Okay, let's look at subtraction. We're almost done. I know your head is hurting. We're almost there. I promise. Again, here's something that may or may not happen in your house if you don't have teenagers. I don't even know if my daughter knows what a payphone is, if you see that picture there. Real life situations happen every day. Here we go. On Tuesday, Winona's daughter was given 45 minutes to clean the kitchen, but she wasted 23 minutes texting her friends. How much time does she have left to clean the kitchen before she loses her phone privileges? So let's see. 45 minutes, we know we can break that down into 40 plus 5, or 4 10s and 5 1s. 23 minutes, we can break that down into 20 plus 3, or 2 10s and 3 1s. Now when we subtract, we want to subtract just as we did before, 10s with 10s and 1s with 1s. We're subtracting by place value. So I'll take my 4 10s and subtract my 2 10s, which leaves me with 2 10s. I take my 5 1s and subtract my 3 1s, which leaves me with 2 1s. So I'm left with 2 10s and 2 1s, or 22 minutes before I take the phone. She probably won't like that at all. Here's another way that we can represent this problem. Again, we can use our lines and squares instead of the rods and the units. So 45 minutes should be 4 10s and 5 1s. There's a little typo there for 43. 4 10s, 5 1s. 23 minutes, 2 10s, and 3 1s. So I'm going to take 2 of those 10s away. I'm going to go back so you can see what happened there. I'm taking 2 of the 10s away from the 4 10s. And I'm taking 3 of the 1s away from the 5 1s. That shows that I've taken away 23. And what remains is on the left, which is 2 10s and 2 1s, or 22 minutes. Again, same answer, different idea about how we can represent using the rods and the units. So let's take a look at regrouping, aka what we learned as borrowing. We can trade up 10 units for a single rod, but we can also trade down, go in reverse, 1 rod for 10 units. So let's say we represent the number 10 with a single rod. I can also break this rod apart and trade them for 10 unit cubes. Both are equivalent representations of the number 10. Likewise, I can show 100 as a single flat, or I can break that flat apart and trade it in for 10 rods. Again, both of these represent the number 100. We are trading now one single place value for a grouping of equivalent values, which is what may be required sometimes for subtraction. So let's try this out. We're going to subtract 752 minus 236. Let's start by modeling 752. We have 7 hundreds, 5 10s, and 2 1s. Let's use this dotted line to separate what we're actually removing or subtracting from the original model. Notice that we have to take away 6 1s, but we only have 2 1s showing. So we can break apart one of our 10s and loan it to the 1s place as 10 1s. There are the 10 1s there. This is where we get the idea of borrowing. Once we loan it out, we remove that 10 rod that we broke apart. We don't need it anymore. Now we have 12 1s, and we can begin to subtract. Let's remove 6 1s. There's 1. We're going to put these in a little faster. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now for the 3 10s, we're going to just remove those by removing them from our top model, 2 and 3. And then we're going to finally remove the 200s or the 2 flats. So remember, subtract means to take away or to physically remove, and that's what we've done. We started with 7 hundreds, 5 10s, and 2 1s, and we have physically removed, let's just make sure, 6 1s, 3 10s, and 200s. So we have essentially removed 236. So now our students can just look at what's left on the top. We can make this disappear. If they're working in the classroom on manipulatives, they would literally move these off of their paper and look at what they have left. We have 500s, 1 10, and 6 1s. And so 752 minus 236 becomes 516. Now, ultimately, students do develop the algorithm for subtraction, including the borrowing that we know about, but that comes after much practice with building the conceptual understanding of regrouping. Remember, that's composition or decomposition, and trades, also known as compensation. So poll time, this is the last one. The question is, if we want to subtract 548 minus 365, how many rods do we have after we break down one flat? So we're going to take a flat and break it down. We want to know how many total rods we have, but before actually subtracting. I know that sounded really crazy. So after we break down one flat and turn it into rods, how many total rods or how many total tens will we have before we actually remove any of them? Here are your options: 4, 8, 10, or 14. So again, once we break down the flat, loan it to the rods, how many rods will we have before removing any? Is it 4, 8, 10, or 14? See a couple of responses. A few more seconds as we think it through. One flat breaks down into 10 rods. All right, let's take a look. So if I take this flat and break it down, which I'll have to do because I have to subtract 6 tens and I don't have enough, okay? So I'm going to take this flat and break it down. That's going to give me 10 rods, and then I'll remove that flat. The total number of rods I'll have before I remove any for subtraction will be the 4 that I originally had plus the 10 that I wrote down. So now I have 14 rods. So this is the same idea of kind of like crossing out the 4 and then putting a 1 next to it. So now we have 14. This is how our students develop that algorithm. So if you got stuck with this, that's okay. If you got this one, that's okay too. Remember, our students have tons and tons of practice, and you had like a quick 30-minute review. But this is good stuff. Great work with what you've done today. So what do I want you to walk away from this webinar knowing? One, not how to use manipulatives, but know that they exist to help your child make tens, to add, and to subtract. I want you to understand that carrying and borrowing are still present within the schools as a part of the Common Core standards. They're just developed from the concepts of place value and making trades. Carrying is based on composition, which means building up to a higher place value. Borrowing is based on decomposition, breaking down from a higher place value to the next lower one. So we're wrapping up here. If there's anything we can do to help, please don't hesitate to reach out at one of these email addresses. And if you're watching the recording, you can also use these to request a PDF of resources we have available. And with that, thank you for your time. And I'll take time now to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you so much, Winona. I think I learned a lot there. Although, you know, it was a lot to take in, and I know in the last webinar that you did, you showed some of the resources, and so all of those resources are again attached to this webinar. So if it's not soaking all in and you need a refresher, you can go check out some of those web pages that Winona has provided for us as well. So we're gonna wait and let's see if we get any questions here. Please type them in the questions box. All right, so here's one. Where can I go to make or print out 10 frames to use with my students?
Okay, so great question. I'm going to give you a resource that most people who are not teachers don't know about. And there is one called teacherspayteachers.com. This one is full of resources that have been created by educators that are actually using them in their classroom. Now, heads up, some of these do cost, but you can sort resources by price and choose the free ones. You can also just Google 10 frames. Click on any image that pops up, and you'll be able to print out a downloadable version of a 10 frame.
Great, thank you. Teacherspayteachers.com. Okay.
Yes.
All right, and now we have another question. Can you suggest additional types of manipulatives for math?
There are tons of them. Um, they have all kinds. We have, like if you saw the 10 frames, you saw the base 10 blocks. There's something called Cuisenaire rods, which kind of helps students with this idea of proportional reasoning, and I'm air quoting there, but it really helps with fractions. There are counters, there are analog clocks, there are tons. I probably should put a list of resources together. I still need to do one for some books that someone requested. But let's get a list of elementary age math resources together for you, and we can have those available.
Great, and we can actually make those available potentially at our next webinar, Winona. Would that be possible for the one on
Yes,
Thursday?
definitely.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
we can.
So even if you just, register for that webinar, then you'll get access to those. So next question, can you suggest any game-based activities for practicing 10 frames?
Well, off the top of my head, here I'm going here. I would say anything that allows the student to count. So if you're working with, say, Lego blocks, or you're working with Skittles or M&Ms, or any like toy action figures, anything that will allow the child to build up in the frame, and then help them, maybe let's take the action figures. I loved action figures growing up. They can maybe create a story around the action figures themselves. Like Star Wars was the ones that I liked, and I was always Princess Leia. She was the only girl. But we can talk about, like, if there was some adventure and we needed Luke and Darth Vader and Princess Leia, but people were missing. How many more people do we need to go on this adventure if we do 10? That's just one off the top of my head. But again, online, there are tons of activities that are available for easy download. But I think it helps if the child can kind of engage in something that they're already interested in, especially while we're at home now.
Okay, great. So, and then we had one comment, someone did say that they used, I've used 10 frames recently with my daughter, and we used jelly beans for counters. This motivated her because she got to eat them afterwards. So
Yes,
that
exactly.
was
Candy's a great motivator.
that is a good one. That is a good one. All right. So those are all the questions, but if you think of a question in the next minute or so, please go ahead and type it in. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for now. And just to let you know that we do have one more webinar coming up on the Common Core train here, and that's not how you multiply, and that's going to be Thursday, this Thursday, April 30th at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can find the registration links on the Tutor.com military Facebook page, which is facebook.com/tutor.dot.com for military, FOR military. And you can also email us at the email address that you got for your registration today, and we'd be happy to send the link if you don't already have it. We also always love to hear ideas for any future webinars, so please feel free to email those to me. My email address is now up on the screen, maureen.haney@tutor.com. And I know we're not focusing on Tutor.com for these webinars, but many of you probably have access to one of our existing programs through either your K-12 school, through the military, through a library. If you don't fall under those programs, do check your local library to see if they offer Tutor.com as a resource for free for their patrons. And you can always go to the Tutor.com website to have a free session and try it out. Our tutors are just as smart as Winona when it comes to this new math. So if you didn't quite grasp everything today and become an expert and you still need a little bit of help, please know that our tutors are there to help